We are continuing the series that we started a while ago. I don't even remember when we started the series, but we what we did with the series to begin with is if you are new and you're unfamiliar with what we're doing with the series, Deliver Us From Nowhere, is we basically crowdsourced the sermon ideas and just asked like, hey, what are some thoughts? What are some questions? What are some ideas, some images, whatever that maybe you were handed at a certain point, and we're asking, is this harmful? Is this damaging? Is this okay for me to think? Does the Bible reinforce these ideas, or did this actually come out of some other thing? And so what we've been doing for this series is we've been exploring those ideas, and we're gonna do this through the end of November. So we've got a few weeks to go. So we've been sort of, again, kind of diving into the different topics that people asked about. And what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks is we've been sort of adding to it based on how people have been responding since we started the series. So we will have people come up to us, Ashley or I, usually Ashley, because people are more comfortable talking to her. And so they'll basically come and say like, hey, are you going to talk about this? Or since you just talked about this, I actually have a follow-up question that has to do with these other things. And so we've been trying to sort of make space for those ideas and those questions as well. And this one today, this is almost, okay, first of all, do you remember a few weeks ago how everybody was talking about the rapture? Just like randomly, everybody thought like, is this it? Is this going to happen? And so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that. So this is like a straight up ripped from the headlines sermon about the rapture that we're somehow going to do in 2025. And if you're unfamiliar with this terminology, what we're talking about when we talk about rapture, if somehow you've not been privy to this kind of conversation before, so the idea of rapture in certain evangelical Christian cultures is that one day, a day unknown to any of us, the people who are going to the correct destination will disappear, be lifted up into the sky, will go to heaven, and then everybody who wasn't part of that group, all of the not so good people, all the people who didn't make the right choice or decision at some point in their life, will be left here on earth to sort of fend for themselves. And there's books that maybe you saw at an airport bookstore at some point that really kind of dig into this idea. And this, for a long time, was a big popular idea that, again, sold lots and lots of copies of books. And there have been TV shows and novels and all sorts of other kind of depictions of what this might look like. And so the idea of rapture is one of these days, there will be a percentage of us that just is no longer here. And there's lots of for those who sort of subscribe to this, there's lots of sort of internal discussion about like, will it happen? Like at what stage of like death and destruction among people of the earth will this happen? That's not even a thing we're going to get into today. But there are lots of internal conversations beyond just like, will this or will this not happen? And will it or will it not happen in my lifetime? And so there's a lot going on here. And so lots of questions about like, why did people think it was going to happen a few weeks ago? Obviously, it seems to not have, unless it was a big secret and not very many people got lifted up or whatever. And so now we're sort of living in why did people think that? And are we going to go through another cycle in which people assume it's going to happen again? So, and we actually have gotten a few questions about whether or not we are getting close to sort of like this big moment, this like apocalyptic kind of moment in which like the certain people like disappear or like go up to heaven or whatever. And so today what we're going to talk about is the concept of the rapture, because that all of a sudden became top of mind for about a week or so. And of course, what people start doing like crazy things like maxing out their credit cards and like telling their boss what they really think. And then all of a sudden like, oh gosh, I got to go back to work. So we're sort of getting into this conversation about like, okay, well, is this in the Bible? And if so, like why, like what exactly is it? Are we supposed to like take away from that? Are there signs about like when this is supposedly going to happen? And so we're going to talk about all of that. But first, we have to start by talking about some theology surrounding the notion of heaven, and which is a whole sermon that Ashley did a few weeks ago in the series. And so a lot of what we're going to do today is we're going to review some of that. And so so I apologize, but we have to reintroduce some of these ideas in order to kind of get into where did this theology of rapture even come from in the first place. So first of all, in the ancient Near East, when the Bible was created, people had a three-tiered view of the universe. And we've talked about this before. So when I say a three-tiered view of the universe, there was no notion of like there are planets and there are galaxies and solar systems, nothing like that. The idea for a long time was that the earth was flat, and there was, again, a three-tiered view of all reality. So the center tier, and I realize we talked about this before, so humor me if you've heard this before, but so the middle tier is where we live, like the terrestrial zone, the place where human beings are alive. And then there is a tier below the earth, which is basically where death and decay exist. This is why people like are buried under the ground and things like that. The idea of that is where death occurs. So that's the second tier. And then the uppermost tier is where the gods live. This would have been referred to as the heavens. And so the whole notion was there are three different tiers to the universe. And so if you are here living among people, you are just an alive person. But then if you go up a tier, you are where the gods are, which is why in the ancient world, a lot of the times you would find temples and altars up on like high in what they would refer to as high places. So you would go to like the tops of mountains or hills or some sort of more elevated space because you're trying to get closer and closer to the gods. So that's the idea. That is the idea surrounding a lot of this language that we adopt really, really early on. And so if you were going to where the gods live, if you were going into the heavens, you were going up. So also, by the way, in American Christianity, we have adopted a very escapist view of life. So on the one hand, in thousands and thousands of years ago, in the ancient Near East, there was this idea that the gods were up. So now, fast forward several thousand years, we live in this place and this time. And for the last, say, couple hundred years, there has been a notion of heaven is a place you go in order to escape. And so, or in order to, like this place where we live now, this isn't like real, or this isn't like the most important life you're going to live, because there will be another place. I'm sure if you grew up in certain types of traditions, you might have heard language about like, this world is not my home, I'm just passing through, or something like that. And so, in fact, I remember when I was in high school, there was, I didn't know all the backstory until I got older, but my former youth pastor told me that there was this big argument inside the church, which if you grew up in a Baptist church, the idea of a big argument happening inside the church, not a surprise. So there was this big argument inside the church, and the big argument centered around, are the teenagers expected to attend Sunday night service? Because in Southern Baptist, small town Oklahoma, there are 3 church services a week, and you go to all 3. There's a Sunday morning, a Sunday night, and a Wednesday night. And if you miss any of them, what is wrong with you? And so you are suspected of being an evil sinner who will not be carried away in the rapture. So so the question became like, okay, so when the teenagers attend, are they supposed to come to Sunday night service, or can they go into their own space and have their own services? And the elders of the church were so deeply insistent that the teenagers be there on Sunday night. And eventually my youth pastor decided, like, this is not a fight. I'm not willing to die on this hill. We will go wherever we're told to go. And so the first Sunday night after this whole battle was won by the elders, we have the service, and the pastor gets up and he says, brothers and sisters, he says, tonight we're going to talk about Beulah land. And again, if you aren't familiar with Southern Baptist language, Beulah land is like this slang term from the 1920s that was used to refer to heaven. So we got all the teenagers in the room, and then you have this guy coming in and saying, like, okay, all we're going to do for the rest of this time is we're going to talk about all the ways it's going to be great for you after you're dead. And my youth pastor, not the most like sensitive, like emotionally guy you've ever met, said like, I would like to go hang out with people who aren't like just rounding the corner and headed to Beulah Land like this week. Can we just have a, because the whole thing is basically like, look, if everyone here is basically moving towards like, if all you have left to think about is being dead, then yeah, let's have lots and lots of conversations about Beulah Land. And so it becomes sort of this notion of like, well, we have had our time here, and now we're talking about jumping on the next train outward, and we're going to go some other place. And so again, it becomes this sort of escapist sort of language, and it becomes like, oh, it's going to be so much better when you get to this other destination. And so we tend to talk about the notion of heaven as an attempt to comfort people who are facing death or feeling some amount of despair with life, which is not a bad necessarily thing to do. It's not bad to comfort people who are facing that kind of thing, but it's also sort of like, do we want the entire conversation to be centered around how bad it is here and how much better it would be if we were just someplace else? And so we talk about it as a place we escape to. There's a hymn that's about 100 years old called I'll Fly Away. And this is the notion of like, yeah, this world is a difficult, painful place to be. And wouldn't it be great if we could just fly away to some other place? So there is for the last couple of 100 years in American Christianity, there's kind of been this construct around heaven built in which heaven is basically an escapist fantasy. It is a place where, well, it will be better once we're dead is the message, or if there is some sort of rapture, which basically also, by the way, since the beginning of rapture theology, every generation has believed that the rapture is going to happen in their lifetime. There's always been somebody, and you can do all sorts of studies. Like, since the beginning of this idea, you can find groups of people who were like so absolutely sure that this is going to happen. And so far, as far as I can tell, you tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think it has. And so we are so now we have adopted this language though of escape, like that we hope that this will happen at some point in time. But as Ashley talked about a few weeks ago, there is a very concrete earth-centric dimension to this conversation about heaven in the Bible. So we're going to look at Genesis 1 beginning in verse 10. So in Genesis 1, you have this creation narrative, and you have this poetry, this language about all things being created by this creator God. And so in Genesis 1 verse 10, it says, God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters God called seas. And God saw that it was good. And then jump down to verse 17. It says, God set them in the vault of the sky. He's talking about the stars here, to give light to the earth, to govern day and night, to separate light from darkness. And God saw that that was good. And then if you jump to verse 21, it says, so God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And then in verse 25, God made the wild animals according to their kind, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Do you spot a pattern here? So there is this rhythmic motion. And we've talked before about how Genesis 1 is a poem. And so in the poetic sort of rhythm of the piece, you have these commonly recurring sort of beats. And one of the commonly recurring beats is, and God saw that it was good. So something is created, the thing that is created is described, and then the thing is declared by God to be good. So over and over and over again, we see a God who takes great joy in the thing that God is creating. In Genesis, God celebrates the beauty of what has been created. It was good. There is an inherent built-in from every like atom that it is created with, it is good. So that's one detail. Another important detail, if you want to jump back to Genesis 1, just verses 11 and 12, it says, then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. So notice here, in the midst of everything being declared good, what else do you find? What produces vegetation? Not God, the land produces the vegetation. So this also recurs again with animals and then again with human beings. God empowers creation to create more creation. Are you with me? So not only is everything declared good, everything is also empowered with the ability to create more of the thing that has been created. So everything is empowered with the ability to create. So then in verse 26, if you jump down, it says, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So then we rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock, all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in God's own image. In the image of God, God created them, male and female, God created them. God blessed them and said, be fruitful. And again, be fruitful and increase in number, make more of the good creation. Fill the earth and subdue it, which, by the way, fill the earth, subdue, rule over. These are not things about exploitation or depletion of resources. This is go and treat this with the honor and respect and care that it deserves because it is good. So then it says, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Notice, nowhere in Scripture does God make creation perfect. Never once does God declare this creation is perfect, because perfect implies completion. Perfect implies this thing is whole, this thing is put together. Nothing needs to be added or subtracted in order to engage with this thing. It is exactly as it was always meant to be. That would be perfect. That's not what the word we see here. The word we see here is good. Because if it was perfect, there would be no need to create more. There would be no need to add to something. Perfect implies that a thing is complete. It implies that there's nothing left to do. If a thing is perfect, it's fixed. It's unchanging. So good is different than perfect. Good never stays the same. Things reproduce, things change, things transform. Good is loaded with potential and new life. Good implies that there is more to the story yet to be told. So God, in Genesis 1, places human beings in the midst of this good creation. And central to the purpose of humanity is caring for and creatively ordering this world that has been created by this God who says that it is good. So in Genesis 1 and 2, heaven and earth are the same place. And the word for this state of being is the word shalom in Hebrew. And a lot of times this word gets translated as peace. But shalom implies more than peace. It implies that it is as it was meant to be. It was created. It is as it was meant to be when it was originally created. It still bears its inherent goodness. And so later in the story, in Genesis 3, shalom is disrupted. And there is a breaking of the good. And all of a sudden, heaven and earth are no longer connected like they once were. There is a disruption. And so much later in the scriptures, like all the way to the other end of the Bible, a writer named John begins talking about how things will look when shalom is fully restored. So Genesis 1 and 2 is about the establishment of shalom. And then in Genesis 3, shalom is disrupted. And then all the way, like if you have a Bible, just take all the pages and flip them to the other side. And then all the way at the other end, you have Revelation 21. And so you have this writer named John who's saying, like, one day things will become more and more like they were always meant to be. Shalom will be restored. So in Revelation 21, verse 1, it says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of the heavens from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. So now, in traditional rapture theology, the people leave earth to go up to heaven, right? Like this is the image that we often see, is like people like floating up into the sky or just disappearing altogether. But here in John's vision, heaven, like people don't go up. What happens? Heaven comes down. Another detail, by the way, notice it says, I saw the holy city. So the detail here is it's not a garden anymore, it's a city. So if you start with a garden and then do away with all of the death and destruction, what will you eventually have? I would argue you would have a city full of gardens. So now in this picture, it's no, things are being put back together, and it's not, we're all just getting out of here so the whole thing can just like dissolve. We are now participating in something that is becoming more concrete and more terrestrial than ever before. So then if you jump to the next chapter in Revelation, chapter 22, verse 1, it says, then the angel showed me a river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great streets of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, which, by the way, is an echo of something you see in Genesis 1 and 2, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So when John describes heaven, as it shows up at the end of Revelation, what kinds of images do we see? We see rivers, we see water, we see streets, we see a city, we see trees. There is something very terrestrial about this view of heaven. Heaven is a very earth-like place. So we tend to think of heaven, again, in rapture theology, we tend to think of heaven as this disembodied place where we're all floating around on clouds, playing harps, being pretty bored, I would imagine. But the scriptures paint a much more physical, tactile, tangible picture. In the immortal words of Belinda Carlisle, heaven is a place on earth, according to the scriptures. I expect to see the Spotify numbers on that skyrocket after today. And I'm sure lots of you are sitting here because you've been here for this whole series and you're sitting here thinking, didn't Ashley already cover all of this? Like, why are you wasting our time? I thought we were going to talk about the rapture. All right, okay, settle down. We're getting to it. That was the intro. So now we're gonna get into what we're actually here to talk about. So keep all of that in mind. Just kind of bookmark that in your minds as we move into what we're going to talk about now, which is what do we do with the notion of rapture? So again, if you're unfamiliar with this, rapture is this idea that one day the good people, will say, like in the minds of most, like evangelical Christians, probably American mostly, will one day either be lifted up into the sky or will just vanish into thin air, depending on which Kirk Cameron movie you've seen most recently. So you will often see people's theology show up in bumper stickers. I'm sure you've seen this a lot. So there is one bumper sticker that says, you can find all these on Amazon.com if you're just looking for Christmas gifts. So this one says, are you rapture ready? Which is a challenging question from a bumper sticker. I can imagine many lives have been changed from sitting at a red light behind this bumper sticker. We're going to look at that passage in 1 Thessalonians in a second. The next one, I really like this one. In case of the rapture, this car will be unmanned. I've seen this one a lot, which is basically a threat, is it not? It's basically like, if you are driving a car, say 70, 80 plus miles an hour down I-40, and all of a sudden there's no driver left and the car is unmanned. It's not a car anymore, it is a missile. And it is basically when a person buys this and puts this on their car, what they're saying is, my religion may kill you, is basically the message of this bumper sticker. And then I found another one. This doesn't directly reflect rapture theology, but I like the optimism. In case of rapture, can I have your car? I like the self-awareness of this one. Like, I'm definitely not going, but I sure could use a car. So anyway, so you can find, and there's more if you want to just completely mess up your Amazon algorithm right before Christmas, then you can go and find all of these. So the rapture is actually a relatively new theory, believe it or not. There are Bible verses that are used in order to bolster this, but it's actually very, very new. It actually first popped up around the year 1830 which is less than 200 years ago, for those of you trying to do math. And it showed up in Great Britain around the year 1830. It was mainly talked about by a preacher named John Darby, and which 1830, by the way, is a long time since the birth of the Christian movement. So for the first 1800 years or so of the Christian, like the predominant Christian faith, this theology was not part of the conversation. This is not something that the early church fathers or most of people throughout church history had ever even thought about or even talked about. So the question is, okay, if it's only a couple hundred years old, where did it come from? Why did somebody all of a sudden start talking about this just 200 years ago? And why did it, if it's that recent, why did anybody start believing it in the first place? That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. There are a couple of passages, and we saw this referred to it a second ago in one of those bumper stickers. But there are a couple of passages in the Bible that were eventually used to create this idea. And so we're going to look at the two primary ones. So, and again, the first one was reflected in one of those bumper stickers. So this is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. And so this is a writer named Paul. This is thought to be maybe Paul's earliest letter, for those of you keeping track. And so in 1 Thessalonians verse 4, beginning verse 13, Paul writes, "Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him." And of course, obviously, falling asleep is a euphemism for death. So, and so according to the Lord's will, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. And so you may be sitting there thinking, like, sounds a lot like the rapture to me. So here's what we miss when we just look at this at face value. Paul is drawing from a very specific Greco-Roman custom known as apantesis, which is it is a Greek word that means meeting, and so which is indicated by his use of the verb apantisen, to meet, in verse 17. So he literally uses the word that this derives from. So this was actually a technical term that described the custom of sending a delegate outside the city to receive a dignitary who was on their way into the town. So it was customary for people to vie for pride of place in meeting the dignitary. So basically, if you live in a town, or in this town, Thessalonica, if you lived in this town and a well-known Roman official or someone sent by Caesar was going to come and visit your town, you would want to have somebody greet them before they get to the city gates. And so what you would do is you would apantisen with them. You would send out a group of people to meet them before they get to the city. You would welcome them to let them know that they won't be attacked or killed when they get to the city. And then you would go with them back into the city. And so Paul here is using this word to talk about what happens when Jesus shows up. And again, people would often vie for the ability, everybody wanted to be a part of this welcome crew because it sort of establishes you as someone with some amount of power or status or respectability in the community. And so hence Paul's assurance that Christians who have died already would not be inconvenienced when this kind of thing happened. They would actually be able to also participate in this kind of thing. So most importantly, though, the custom was that people who went out to meet the dignitary actually came back into the city with the dignitary, and they would escort him in a grand procession into the city. So in the scenario Paul is describing, this would mean welcoming Jesus to earth and joining him here. It wouldn't be I'm going to meet you out there, and then we're just going to turn around and go back to where you came from. You know what I mean? So the idea is this was a way to welcome someone who was coming into your city. So the reality this is pointing toward is this: Jesus will be fully present. The dead will be raised, and everyone will be transformed and made new. The crucial point of what Paul is trying to say is not we're going to all get out of here one day. The point that Paul is trying to make here is he is affirming the hope of reunion for those who have fallen asleep. He's trying to offer some amount of hope for people who have lost someone and for people who feel a certain amount of despair and hopelessness in this moment. He's saying the story is not over yet. And so the story functions not to warn the readers of some kind of judgment at the last day, but rather to reassure them. Therefore, he says, therefore, encourage one another with these words. In other words, like, yeah, we've all lost people, and yeah, we've seen pain and we've seen hardship, and we often wake up every day feeling quite disempowered and a little bit afraid. And Paul is saying, like, that doesn't actually have to be how the story ends. The whole thing is actually moving towards some amount of renewal and redemption. And there is this crashing into earth that heaven is attempting to do. This is when Jesus prays, or when Jesus teaches his followers to pray, he says, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He's saying, let's make this place more like the place it was always meant to be. And so this is, again, sort of part of that whole conversation of we are welcoming something in that will restore and renew a thing that we thought was dead. And so that is what's going on in the First Thessalonians passage. It has nothing to do with, okay, let's just get out of here as fast as we can. It is, no, what can we do here? How can we welcome goodness and new life into this space? So the second passage that is often used is in Luke chapter 17. There's actually an old song by a guy named Larry Norman. It's called I Wish We'd All Been Ready. I don't know if you've heard this song. It's basically like, it's just a bunch of like terrifying scenarios about people who are like hanging out and then one of them disappears. And the idea is like the one who disappeared went to the place you want to go. And so this passage is actually where that song comes from. So in Luke 17, verse 26, it says this. This is Jesus speaking. He says, just as it was in the days of Noah, so also it will be in the days of the Son of Man, which is a way he refers to himself. People were eating and drinking and marrying and being given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. Then the flood came and destroyed them all. And then if you jump to verse 34, he says, I tell you, on that night, meaning like when Jesus returns, basically, I tell you on that night, two people will be in one bed. One will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding grain together and one will be taken and the other left. And again, we tend to assume that the one who disappears went off to heaven because we have an escapist view of this. And the one who's left behind, if you will, is the one who missed an opportunity to also go to wherever the other person went. So people often use this as an argument for traditional rapture theology. The good people are taken and the bad people are left behind. But notice, what does Jesus say right before he draws these scenarios? He mentions the days of Noah. Now, if you're familiar with the Noah story, what happens? You have a bunch of people who are committing lots and lots of violence. And eventually, the people who are committing lots of violence are swept away in a flood. And the people who are left behind are Noah and his family. So in the Noah story, who disappears and who's left behind? Noah and his family are the ones who are left behind. So we have created an exact inversion of what Jesus is trying to say in this passage. We tend to assume Jesus is saying that people who follow the way of Jesus will get out of here and the whole place will just burn up and disappear. But Jesus is saying the opposite of that. He's saying, no. There are people who are participating in what God is doing in the world. And those people will continue to be given more and more opportunities to do so. And there are people who will continue to commit violence, to make the world a darker, more harmed place. And maybe there is a future version of the story where it's going to be hard for people who choose that as a way of life to find a way to continue doing that in this new reality. So here's why this matters. how we talk about the end of the story impacts how we think about the whole story. So we talked about this early in the series when we talked about the Bible. When you looked at the beginning of the story and the end of the story, you kind of figure out what the story is about. And if we assume that the story ends with everybody just like jumping on a jet plane and getting out of here, then it changes the way we engage the story. If the whole point is for everything to just be destroyed and for all the right people to get whisked away to somewhere else, it reduces the value of all of the creation that, if you'll recall, God says is good. So look at 1 Timothy verse 4. Again, this is the writer named Paul. In 1 Timothy 4, Paul writes this. He says, the Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon the faith and some follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such things come through the hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with hot irons. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods, which God created and to be received with which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and those who know the truth. So there's a lot of like big language that's probably worth spending more time on than what we have. But there was at the time there was a certain heresy, which is basically a fancy way of saying like a teaching that was kind of like dismissed as harmful or dangerous at the time. So there was a certain heresy at the time that this was written, claiming that this heresy was interacting with the early church, and it was basically claimed that you should enjoy nothing physical and that you should pull away from all things physical and only things that would have been categorized as spiritual. So the idea is like anytime you enjoy things like relationships or human connection or food or travel or anything, you are participating in worldly things, and that was seen as sinful. And so what Paul is doing here is he's addressing this particular heresy. So Paul talks about these things that are confusing people, and then he says, so here's the truth. And then in verse 4, he says this. He says, for everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, because it is consecrated by the word of God and prayer. In other words, when God creates the world, God says it's good. And apparently, God still thinks it's good. So if you enjoy things about being alive that isn't worldly or whatever that's even supposed to mean, that isn't harmful or sinful, that's good. It's because when it was created, God says it's good. And to enjoy the things that God says is good is connecting with the story that God is telling. It's good to affirm the things that God already says is good. So there are lots of dimensions to this and ways that we can sort of kind of confront this escapist way of thinking that maybe we can kind of reorient our thoughts. So just real quickly, there are 4 dimensions I just want to mention as we go. The first dimension of this is creation. We've already talked about this a lot, which is basically the notion of what we have here, what is in front of us, whatever is created inherently has some sort of, at an atomic level, it has some sort of goodness at its core. And so we have this notion that whatever's good is worth engaging and celebrating and affirming and treating as if it's good. I wasn't actually at this conference, but I heard the talk later. But there was a conference for Christian leaders where there was a Q&A. There were some megachurch pastors there doing some Q&A. And one of the questions was, this is, 15, 20 years ago. And one of the questions was to the panel of megachurch pastors, what do you think about like Christians who are environmentalists? So basically just like, is it good or is it not good for Christians to care about the well-being of the planet? And like, you would not think that this would be a controversial take, but it is. Like the idea that we should care for and be good stewards of the earth that we live on is in a lot of Christian circles, because of this escapist theology, is considered to be like can be sometimes considered to be controversial. And so this was addressed on this panel. So somebody said, so what does everybody here on this panel think about Christian environmentalism? And one of the guys on this panel, who I will not name, said, This is a quote. He says, I know who made, this is part of a long rant because he went on a long rant. He says, I know who made the environment and he's coming back to burn it all up. And that was some guy at a conference. So there was, yeah. This is not an uncommon way of seeing things. Like, yeah, in fact, I used to work on staff a couple of churches ago with a guy who absolutely adopted this point of view of like, yeah, what's the point? What's the point of recycling when the whole thing's going to burn? Like literally, we were having a staff meeting about should we or should we not have recycling bins in the lobby, and his response to that was, why bother? The whole thing's going to burn. This is a worship leader at a mega church. And so a little upsetting, to hear somebody just say that out loud. But this is not an uncommon thing because we tend to look at creation with a certain amount of like at best, lack of concern, at worst contempt, because we sort of just assume that the whole thing is depraved and broken and the whole thing's gonna burn up anyway. But if you have, because that's what rapture theology has sort of given way to, because it is based in escapism. But if we adopt this Genesis 1 view of the whole thing is good, which Paul echoes in 1 Timothy, then we have to sort of begin acknowledging like, oh wait, maybe we haven't been thinking about creation the way that we're actually supposed to. Take a look at, so this, again, this kind of posture, this is the kind of posture that rapture theology creates permission for. To talk and act as if creation isn't good and does not have value. So look at Romans 8. This is Paul again. He says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, which is basically he's referring back to Genesis 3 and the disruption of shalom. And so he says, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. In other words, the idea that creation itself is not good and has some sort of intrinsic goodness and value to it, that idea has like no home in the scriptures. Because what Paul is saying here is that all of creation is groaning for renewal and restoration. This good creation, all of it, longs for the restoration of shalom. Not just human beings, all of it. Everything that has ever been declared good by God is worthy of redemption and shalom. The end goal here has never been destruction. The whole posture of the whole thing's going to burn has no place in the Bible. The kingdom of God is not somewhere else. The goal is restoration, and the place is right here. So that's the first dimension, creation. The second dimension is self-care, because you were also part of creation. You were also created with the image of God buried deep inside of you. There is some sort of, at a cellular level, there is some sort of divine goodness born inside of you. And this is one of the flaws of what we might refer to as like conversion-centric thinking. Like if the whole idea is like, I just need to convince this person to believe the same things that I do, so that if there is one day a rapture, they can like come, we can hold hands on our way up or whatever. And so the idea here is, and I've known there is lots of, in certain circles, there's lots of like downplaying of the value of mental health care, or the care for the self in any sort of idea. Because again, if we treat our minds and our bodies in the same way that we've been treated, or we've been taught to treat the earth, then yeah, why not just treat the whole thing like it has no value, and that one day the whole thing's just gonna just dissolve and not have value anymore. And so humans, according to Genesis 1, are integrated beings, soul and body. So in the same way that you are an integrated being now, heaven is a reuniting of the body with the soul. So heaven is an integrated reality. So heaven is about the whole person engaging with the whole shalom of God. So rapture theology denies the value of thinking that our bodies are critical parts of our spiritual selves. We have, again, this sort of like split idea of, well, our souls are good and our bodies are bad. But according to the scriptures, like, no, the whole thing is you. Like, you are your body. Your body is part of you. And so, and your mind is part of you. So treating our bodies and our minds as if they are good and worthy of the redemption and restoration and shalom, that is participating in this Genesis 1 theology. And so rapture theology tends to minimize, again, mental health care, because it won't matter one day. That becomes sort of the posture. We become kind of like nihilistic and destructive about anything that we feel is like it's not coming with us or whatever. But the whole idea here is like, no, the whole thing is in the process of being renewed and redeemed. Everything is being put back together again. It groans with the aches and pains of one that wants to be restored. So that's the second dimension. It would be self-care. The third dimension is relationships. In the kingdom of God, human beings live among one another in shalom. We see this throughout the scriptures of this image of people like connecting with one another and longing for connection with one another. We bring heaven to earth when we practice forgiveness and when we practice love and when we show grace to other people. We bring heaven to earth when we offer help to people who need it. We bring heaven to earth when we pour time and energy into our relationships. That's not wasting time, and it's not spinning our wheels. It's participating in the renewal of all things. So our relationships are part of are part of the story of the restoration of shalom, of bringing heaven crashing into earth. If we have an escapist theology, then what difference does it make? But if we have a here and now terrestrial view of the whole thing, then our relationships are critically important. They not only are they good for each of us, they're good for the whole thing. They put shalom back in place. So that's the third dimension. And then the fourth dimension is justice. And this is a much larger conversation. But in rapture theology, and again, I mean, many of you may have come out of different traditions where the idea of justice was minimized or was kind of dismissed or was seen as not even all that important, because we tend to minimize our role in advocating for justice for people who have been marginalized. Because we tend to assume that if a person believes the right things in life, then one day they'll just go somewhere else and they'll be happy, and whatever hardships they suffered on earth won't have mattered, because yeah, you may have been the victim of injustice for 80 years, your entire time on earth, but like one day you will fly away, and which by the way, I'll fly away came from a person who had experienced injustice and was looking for some sort of hope in the midst of that injustice. And so we have this sort of embedded notion that that there is that the justice here doesn't matter, that caring for the marginalized has no real value, because one day the whole thing's just going to disappear anyway. But again, over and over and over again throughout the scriptures, we find an emphasis on things like justice and restoration. It would be easy to argue that how we think about this concept of rapture doesn't matter. But it matters because how we believe the story ends directly impacts how we engage the rest of the story. If I believe that nothing here matters, then yeah, justice, self-care, creation care, none of that has any, like all of that is a waste of time. I should just spend all my time like trying to convert other people into my way of thinking and praying a bunch, and then just hoping one day I'll just die. And I think the scriptures are waving us away pretty hard from that point of view and saying like, no, life here matters. All of life is part of the restoration of shalom. You are participating in a story that is about the heaven and earth colliding with one another. We are not invited to participate in a story about escapism and disengaging from the here and now. We are invited to participate in bringing the kingdom of God into this space in this time.